So we're recording this conversation with Kurtis Alexander from San Francisco Chronicle.
Hey, Bill, or is it William?
William, I go by William E. Simpson.
Hey, William, how are you?
I'm good. I don't see you.
I'm gonna stay off camera right now because I'm not wearing my fanciest clothes.
Okay. Well, then I guess you got me at a disadvantage. So let me start out with this preamble that I'm granting this interview with the understanding that this is being recorded for continuity and that you will keep everything I give you in context. Is that agreed?
Why are you recording it? Just out of curiosity, because I'm not recording you.
Well, I want a recording to make sure that everything you say going forward is kept in context.
Okay. I guess I can assure you, as a reporter who's been doing this for a long time, that I do keep things in context.
Okay, are we in agreement that as a part of this agreement for my interview, you will keep what I give you in context? Agreed?
How are you going to record? I mean, what are you going to do with this recording?
It's a Zoom recording. I'm just keeping it for reference.
Are you going to post it on Facebook or social media or something like that?
It won't come up if everything I say is kept in context. It's that simple.
Let me check with my editor because I'm not, I mean, this is
Right.
like,
Well, if you're
I
gonna
rarely have
if you're
my
gonna Curtis,
competencies. I
Curtis,
rarely have my competencies doubt. Please don't interrupt me. I rarely have my competencies doubted. And this is just kind of
this is
very
okay.
odd.
Well, with all of the subterfuge with dam removal going on and the one-sided propaganda, which is very evident out there. Okay, I want an understanding, and I don't know you from Adam. Trust is earned; it's not given. Okay, that's a fact of life on this planet. Um, I don't care what your credentials are. I have lots of credentials too. The thing is this:
And I trust you.
we're two men.
And I take you at
I'm
your word.
asking,
Yeah.
and I'm asking for a simple agreement that what I give you, you'll keep it in context. It's that simple.
I agree to keep it in context. What I don't agree to is having this conversation recorded and, put out on social media in a context that is not representative of our conversation.
Well, it wouldn't be representative of the conversation if I modified it. If it's in continuity, in the same way it goes for you. Whatever I tell you right now, you're welcome to use, as long as it's kept in context, in the stream that it's in. So it goes both ways.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. All
I'll
right.
agree to that.
Okay.
I'm just going to be straightforward with the questions and obviously there's two sides to every story and that's why I'm reaching out to you.
Of course.
You probably know what I've been told by the proponents and the managers of the dam removal. They're concerned about the horses in the reservoir footprints, and they say the horses are eating the vegetation that they've planted to try to revegetate the reservoir footprints and to try to hold up the banks of the basin to keep sediment and debris from getting into the river. And I don't know that the horses are yours at all. I've heard people say that. I have talked with folks at the county, and they've suggested that. But I wanted to check in with you and see, are these your horses? Are they a problem? I do know that horses have a legal right to range in Siskiyou County. So just wanted to hear what you had to say in response to what others are saying.
Okay. So first of all, let me give you just a bit of my background, Curtis. Um,
Sure.
I grew up in this area. My brother-in-law is a Klamath Indian. He passed away when he was 35, though. From the time I was a teenager, we tracked, we hunted, we fished, including up on the Mazama, which is the Klamath Traditional Forest, big area, almost 90,000 acres, just north of where the dams are. So this is, my parents are
Yeah.
buried in the ground here. Okay. I graduated high school here. And then I went to Oregon State, pre-med science major. From there, I learned enough science to go into multiple vocations, including graduating from the Maritime Academy. I'm a United States Merchant Marine officer. I was a captain of medical missionary ships and commercial passenger carrying vessels and charter boats, you name it. I'm also a commercial instrument, multi-engine airplane and helicopter pilot. And I was trained in a Bell Jet Ranger. I soloed in a Bell Jet Ranger. So I'm not a basic private pilot. I'm a commercial pilot. I actually have
Right,
L1011.
right.
I have L1011 jet time. So anyway, I'm not, people look at me and they think, oh, Bill's just a hayseed. That would be pretty far off the mark. I'm formally educated in science. We have a 5-year contract with California State University. We teach wild horse ecology here. We actually have students on site today studying. We're doing numerous studies in the area, and they've been over the area of the sediment flats and in the surrounding areas, studying the behavioral ecology and ethology of these horses, which are owned in concert, myself, my partner, Michelle, and Wild Horse Fire Brigade, which is a 501c3 nonprofit public benefit corporation, and we're all volunteers. We're not paid. We do this in the public interest. And we do what we do because wild horses in North America are a native species. And that's according not to me, but to a numerous published expert scientists, including Dr. Ross McPhee at the American Museum of Natural History, who's the world's leading paleoecologist with regard to equine evolutionary paleontology. He's the curator of mammalogy at the American Museum of Natural History. So there's not too many people that know more about the evolution of wild horses in North America than Dr. McPhee. And he says, not me, he says they are a native species. The present horses in this area right here, the horses that we actually own in 2022, Siskiyou County officially recognized our ownership of the herd. This is a heritage herd of wild horses that was seen by Sir Francis Drake in 1580 when he sailed up the coast on a mission for Queen Elizabeth. He in the ship's log.
I'm sorry, in 1580? I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I didn't get that.
1580.
You
Yeah,
said 1580?
1580,
Okay, thank you.
1580. So 88
Got
years
it.
after Columbus first seen America.
Wow.
He was on a mission. He was a military officer. He was a knight serving the British Empire. His mission was to find resources for potential settlement by the English nation in the West Coast here. And he was looking for timber, gold, silver, and especially horses, because horses were critically important to settling the landscape. And most people don't know this, but Dr. Yvette Running Horse Collin, an indigenous scholar, PhD, who did her dissertation on the Eurocentric myths of wild horses in North America, found the journals that said, that decided Sir Francis Drake's observation in 1580 of horses right here on the Oregon-California border. In his journals, that's in her dissertation, her doctoral dissertation, which is published and approved. And she also looked in the Spanish archives and noticed that all the Spanish ships, the Portuguese and Spanish brought horses across. They brought them across hung in slings, so most of them died. About half of all the horses shipped, because they were hung in these slings, their feet were on the deck over the Atlantic crossing. They were hung, and half of them died from cardiopulmonary compression. So and most of the ships carried between 8 and 16 horses when they left Europe. By the time they landed, they had, maybe 8 horses. So they were a precious commodity, and they were domestic horses. So when they got here, they guarded them carefully because they were a very important resource for settlers and explorers. They just didn't let them run wild. So here we are, and the reason I'm making this point, I'm getting to the important part of this, Kurtis, which is here we are, Columbus first seen the North America in 1492. 88 years later, 2,500 miles to the west, here's Drake seeing the indigenous living among a lot of wild horses. And so that was, and he noted that because that was a very important strategic resource in those days. And the horses that we have here are the descendants, not all of them, but a lot of them are descended from those original post-Ice Age horses. Because there's no way you would have a plethora of horses here on the West Coast 88 years after Columbus. They couldn't have introduced enough horses to make it across 2,500 miles of mountains and rivers and 50 million indigenous people to have hundreds of horses here where I am. It's just absolutely logistically impossible. So these were a splinter population. So this is a heritage herd of horses that we've been put in charge of, we have ownership of, we're protecting and preserving them because they are a cultural heritage in this area right here. And so the horses with regard to KRRC's activities, and last summer, actually last spring in April or May, I had a face-to-face conversation with Dave Kaufman, who's the head honcho for the RES, which is the Resource Environmental Services LLC from Texas,
Yeah.
right down here on Copco Road at his office. And he said to me, this is in April, May of 2023. He says, we will be putting up fences to keep the horses out of the footprint of the lakes. And we will be providing alternative water, which will serve not only the wildlife, but the horses and any livestock in the area. And that was the agreement across the board. It was in their EIS. That's what they told the county. Both KRRC and RES told this to the county, to the ag commissioner, to county commissioners, to the public. It was made public that these fences would be erected and alternative water provided for the wildlife and for the horses because they were denying access to water source they've been using for hundreds of years. Before the dams were here, these horses were drinking down at the Klamath River. And then, of course, when the dams came in, the horses and the deer and the elk were drinking lake water. Well, when the dams went away and the lakes went down, and that was they started draining the lakes aggressively in January 23 of 2024. The wildlife and the horses had to cross this pudding-like clay mud to try to access water. And of course, we lost dozens of deer and elk and all kinds of other wildlife. And very little of it was actually photographed because, and even the photographs showed dozens, but very little was photographed because a lot of this clay, Gethard Engineering came here and in 2006 analyzed the sediments on the bottoms of the lakes, and they indicated that it was 78% clay. Now that's a pretty important finding because 78% clay is like pudding when it's wet. And so animals would sink down. Some of these sediment banks were 20 feet deep, and a lot of animals just sank down and within 5 minutes were out of sight. So a lot of animals went in and were never seen. They just sank down quickly, and that was the end of it. A lot of them hit bottom at 5-6 feet. Some of the antlers of the elk were sticking up. They were dead. They sank down above their heads, but their antlers were sticking out. They were dead. That was photographed.
Yeah.
It was very tragic. And the thing that troubles me, Kurtis, I'm a conservationist. I am an environmentalist. Okay. And the thing is this, the thing that troubles me is KRRC was given a what is called a takings permit by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Are you familiar with that?
Sure.
Yeah. So the takings
Yeah, I don't
permit,
know what the terms are of their permit. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
well, the takings permit allows the unfortunate loss of a certain amount of wildlife. Okay, it's an accepted measure, in other words. Okay, so they have, and don't quote me on this, the exact numbers, but if I recall generally, if 20 bald eagles died inadvertently, that was part of the takings permit. If so many deer died, that was part of the takings permit. In other words, in the course of this gigantic project, which is an experiment of a grand scale, Fish and Wildlife said, okay, we realize some animals may be killed, but if you read the language of the takings permit and the legislative information that support that, it says that it doesn't relieve you just because you have a permit that says you could take up to 20 eagles, let's say, as an example. that doesn't mean you don't have to exercise reasonable measures to prevent any takings. Do you understand what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So,
Yep.
so the fencing, going back to the fencing and going back to the conversation I had with Dave Kaufman of KRRC in April, May of 2023, was well understood that it was going to limit the loss of wildlife, and the alternative water would prevent the need for trying to get to the river through the mud. And so those fences were supposed to be up, and they have to be in this county. This is a designated statutory open range county. It was established as an open range county in 1893 with the California charter. So this open range, and in this county, any land, private or otherwise, if you don't want animals coming onto your land, livestock, and in this case, because this heritage herd of horses is now privately owned, jurisdictionally, they are now legally livestock. So, and I'll give you an example of, so you can understand what I mean by that. The Bureau of Land Management has these things called herd management areas for wild horses. Okay. When the horse is standing in that box on the map, that's the herd area, and that's a defined term. It is a capital WH wild horse protected under the 1971 Free Roaming and Wild Horse Protection Act. Now, if that wild horse walks over the line onto some other land, depending on who owns the land, that horse could become unauthorized livestock or it could become a feral horse. That doesn't mean it's suddenly not a wild horse. If you or I went on vacation to Mexico City, we don't suddenly become Mexicans. We're still Americans. We just crossed a line. And it's the same thing. So important, and the point of that is that these heritage horses up here were always wild horses. Just because they weren't in an HMA doesn't mean anything. They were genetically came from E. cabalis that evolved here 2 million years ago. And we have fossils, like I said in the preamble with Dr. Ross McPhee. That's settled science. They are a native species. A lot of people don't realize bison, deer, and elk came from Asia to North America across Beringia 200,000 years ago. Horses have been here 2 million years. Indigenous peoples have been here about 25,000 years. So what is the hallmark date in thousands of years to become native? Is it what it is for the indigenous people, 25,000 years, and then you're native? Or is it what it is for bison, 200,000 years? Or is it what it is for horses, 2 million years? So there's a lot of this massaging of data for political and economic wrangling and advantages. And so these horses are heritage horses. When we became the owners of these horses, jurisdictionally, under California law, they are now livestock, and they have all the protections under livestock laws in California. It's a felony to take one. It's a felony to harm one in California, prosecutable by the local sheriff and the state police. So the fences were supposed to be up last April, May. They didn't go up. Okay. August came last year. We complained to KRRC in writing. I did, the county did, the ag commissioner. There were meetings. People complained, why aren't the fences up? Winter's coming, you're going to take the dams down. We all knew what was coming. We all knew the mud would be revealed and animals would die. We all knew this. And it was very plain. It's no surprise. And they delayed and did not put up the fences. And then the winter came. And then in January 23, they dewatered the lakes. And in doing so, they went off their own plan, by the way. There's a well-publicized, been around for 2 years, a diagram, a flow chart with color pictures saying that they would bring the dams early in December and early January, they would bring the dam water level down to minimum operating level. What that means is the turbines still can run. It's the level that we take the water in the lakes down before winter runoff every year. It's a normal lowering of the lakes. And so that's the first step they were going to take, is lower the lakes down. And then if you look at their flow chart over the next 3 months, they were going to slowly dewater the dams. And a lot of people don't know Elwha Dam, which people hold out as some sort of an example. It's not. There's no comparisons, but they hold it out quite often, Elwha Dam. Elwha Dam was dewatered over a 2-year period. And they did that so that the sediments in those lakes stayed put. It's a very important concept because when you let the water out slowly, it kind of locks in the sediments better and it prevents sedimentation of the river and death of wildlife downriver. KRRC was aware that the United States Department Geologic Survey was finishing up a report on the sediment and toxicity in the river and the sediments, and it was in Menlo Park, California, being finished and would be released in January 31 of 2024. KRC was aware of that, and we were also aware that that report showed high levels of heavy metals and forever toxins. They were aware of that, and they were concerned, I believe, this is my conjecture, I can't prove this other than I can show you the dates that the release came and the date that KRC took an action. I have those things which are solid evidence, are undebatable. But Menlo Park announced that they were going to release this report January 2024, January 31st, 2024. It said, I mean, you read it and it's out there. There's a lot of toxins, lead, and some are above and below EPA standards. But the point of that is that they're all bioaccumulative, meaning, for instance, lead can be right below the EPA standard, or chromium or arsenic. But the problem is because they're bioaccumulative, even consuming them, wildlife or humans at low level, they build up and they can kill you or make you very sick. That's why that's important. It doesn't matter that they're acutely above a certain amount. Bioaccumulative chemicals and metals are very serious concerns. So I believe that KRC knew this report was coming out at the end of January 2024. And then on January 23rd, they went off plan and they dewatered the lakes over a matter of a few days, I think 4 or 5 days. And I live on Iron Gate Lake, so I was observing this and documenting it. The lakes went down in a matter of days instead of a matter of months, which caused a phenomenal amount. And I can prove every word I just told you. I can go in a court of law and I can show you the Menlo Park U.S. Geologic Survey report that came out at the end of January of 2024. That is a very unusual coincidence because it talked about a lot of very concerning heavy metals and compounds in the river and in the sediment. So, and anybody who knows anything about settling ponds and how lakes tend to focus and concentrate toxins out of running water. This is why the EPA used settling ponds up at mining operations on the East Coast. Settling ponds are designed to, when you have water carrying turbidity with toxins, heavy metals, for instance, a settling pond lets it settle out. And over time, these sediments become very concentrated with these toxins, and they become very toxic, much higher than the ambient levels. And that's a well-known phenomenon. It's well published, and EPA uses it to abate polluted waters. That's one of their techniques. So DEQ uses it as well. So KRC knows these things. They knew this report was coming out at the end of January 24. So they popped the plug, drained the lakes, went off plan, and drained the lakes in a matter of days instead of a matter of 3 months. And a tremendous amount of sediment went down the river as a result of that. So they say going according to plan. That's absolutely not true. Absolutely not true. And I can prove that in a court of law in front of the Supreme Court if I want to, because I can show their diagram that they presented for 2 years that shows the flow chart of what was approved in their EA. And this is the EIS EA. Here's what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And that's why they got approval. They were going to do it over 3 months. They did it in a matter of a few days. And that's why we had all that sediment go down the river, which has actually caused a phenomenal amount of damage, environmental catastrophe on the entirety of the Klamath River, not just below the dam. We photographed dead salmon, dead trout, dead steelhead, dead turtles, dead frogs, dead crawdads, all the way down the river. And these are native species. It's not warm water fish we're talking about here. Yeah, the warm water fish in the lakes died. you know, the trout, the crappie, the bluegill, they died. But downriver, we saw a tremendous amount of carnage and wildlife dying, dead beavers, dead otters, and they died for a multitude of reasons, but primarily because the dissolved oxygen, because of that clay, went to zero, and it was down there for a couple days, and that even killed the invertebrates. Now, when you think in terms of a crawdad, which is a common name for the Klamath River crayfish, which is a native species, by the way, they say they didn't kill any native species. Mark Bransom has said that multiple times. Now, the facts on the ground argue against what he said. We've got downriver dead salmon, dead steelhead, dead suckerfish, which are protected, endangered, dead beavers, dead otters, dead crayfish, dead sculpin. These are all native species in the Klamath River, all dead. Millions of them dead. We photographed tens of thousands of them dead. So saying that they didn't kill any native species is also untrue. So we have rock solid evidence. They went off plan. There's not going according to plan. They went off plan, and the resulting catastrophic environmental damage is beyond doubt and beyond debate. And so coming back to the sediment and the horses now, okay, a lot of sediment went downriver. Gethard Engineering from Seattle, and I have all these reports I'm referring to. They're in writing. I have the PDFs. Happy to send them to you, Kurtis. Gethard Engineering came down here in 2006, and they looked at the rivers and the sediments. They said that there's 20.4 million cubic yards of sediment in the lake bottoms. And according to Mark Bransom, in a public testimony at Copco Lake, we had a board meeting at Copco Lake in, I believe it was February of 2024. It might have been February 13th. He said that they let go between 5 and 7 million cubic yards of sediment down the river. Now, if they would have stayed on plan and dewatered the lakes over several months, we wouldn't have seen that amount of sediment go down the river. It would probably have been very minor in comparison, but they didn't do that. They went off completely off plan, way off plan, not just a little bit. Way, I mean, a matter of a few days versus a few months. That's way off plan. And the result was just catastrophic damage, ecological damage. They've collapsed the ecosystem to its core. I mean, when you bring the river down to zero dissolved oxygen, the only thing that lives are the anoxic bacterias. So anytime you have an environmental system change, there are different kinds of species that will take advantage. As they say in evolution, there's winners and losers. All the native species died, or most of them. And then in the river itself, the animals that thrive in anoxic conditions, the anaerobic bacteria under the gravel of the lake that are covered with silt now. There's no more reds. There's nowhere places for salmon or steelhead to spawn. It's filled in with clay. And this clay appears like concrete. So when it fills in, it stays put. All the bacteria on those sublayers in the bottom of the river flourished because conditions favored them suddenly, because they like conditions of no oxygen. So they flourished, and nobody's done a study on what's happened with that part of it's part of the ecosystem of the river. You know, the area below the reds and the gravels. This is an area where there's, different kinds of minerals and things sequestered, and different critters live there. So, but the sediment that's remaining up here now that's dry, we had the disaster where we had all the wildlife get caught in the mud because KRRC failed. They were not on plan. They were off plan. KRRC was off plan. RES was off plan. They did not put in the fence last summer like they promised. They did not put it in the winter. And it's still not up today. This is over a year later. There's still no fencing up. And those fences would have saved hundreds of animals from dying in the mud, horrible deaths. And now, because the fences aren't up, of course, the wildlife, the deer, the elk, and the horses are walking down onto the sediment beds because, one, they need water still, because they still haven't provided alternative water. They haven't done that. That was one of their promises. They haven't done it. And two, they haven't put up the fence. So, of course, the animals are going down onto the footprint because that's where the water is. You have, Camp Creek, you have Scotch Creek, Jenny Creek in this immediate area here on Iron Gate Lake. And the animals are going down to get water. And of course, they're browsers, deer, elk, horses are browsers. On the way down, they browse. It's normal behavior. And because they failed to fence it, what's happening is 101% their fault, their responsibility. There is no fault to the animals. There's no fault to our organization or to myself and the way I'm managing my animals. It's 101% fault of KRRC and KRES for failing to be on plan and failing to live up to their promises. And in California, an oral contract is binding. And so we lost the baby horse. A precious little baby horse was killed because the sediment, being clay the way it is, almost 80% clay, when it dries out, it forms these massive cracks. Some of these cracks are 20 inches wide. And so you have these islands that come up 4 or 5 feet out of nowhere of clay. And then some of these islands are 2, 3 feet across. And then in between these islands, it's like telephone poles on end with big gaps in between. And so, and these gaps go down 3, 4, 5 feet. And so, and again, they're between, 8 inches and 20 inches wide. Well, one of our little baby horses fell down in there, got stuck, couldn't get out, and died on a day when it was 115 degrees. He cooked to death and stuck in that crack. And we have multiple supporters that live in the community here. These horses, by the way, saved the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument by grazing in a huge fire break. And I was on the fire line. I was California's CAL FIRE's local knowledge advisor. I was on the fire line up here at Camp Creek 9 days. I was their local knowledge advisor, and I helped them survey in the access roads for firefighters. I showed them where the big fire break was that the horses created, which they used, and that's where we stopped the fire. They got up there in front of that fire and went toe to toe. It's like firefighters, you probably heard this, Kurtis, they talk about fighting fire with one foot in the black. What they're talking about is, and I logged growing up before I went to Oregon State, and I logged a little bit in the summer on summer vacations from Oregon State. And I fought a small fire once in a while. And I understand the language because I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt and the hat. And 1 foot in the black means you did some back burning. And so when the fire, you do that when the wind changes course. So if the wind's blowing this way, fire's coming at you, you just try to fight it. But if the wind shifts and it changes the opposite direction, you light the fuel in front of you and it burns back toward the original direction of the fire. So when the wind changes back, we have adiabatic and kadiabatic winds. So we have the wind almost switches 180 degrees up here in the mountains during the day because of the way the mountains heat and then cool. And so we did a back burn. We had 1 foot in the black, and but that big fire break is almost a couple thousand acres, grazed down. That's how you get normal wildfire, by the way. When you have a good herbivory, which we don't have in California, we're down about 2 million deer in California, about 500,000 in Oregon, according to Oregon Fish and Wildlife. Those deer were eating through about almost 3 million tons of grass and brush. So that's all stacked up right now because no herbivores. But up here, we were blessed to have these horses because they created this really nice fire break, big fire break, a couple miles across, 4 or 5 miles long. And when the fire got up to there, Cal Fire used it to not only move through it safely in front of the fire, but went toe to toe with it. We stopped it. We saved the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument, to me, is priceless. Priceless. That's why I went up there for 9 days and risked my own skin. I didn't get paid. I did that because to me, that's where I hike every day. I love it up there. I love that forest. I love the animals there. And I put my life on the line without pay to help Cal Fire because the guys that were here for Fresno, they had no idea where they gave them a map. I still have the map. I have all the daily briefings, and this is the map right here. Cal Fire's map with all the fancy logos, and let's see if I can show it to you here. Well, there it is. Well, it's upside down. But
Yeah.
but anyway, I was on the, every morning at 8 o'clock, I was with the commanders on the briefings, and I helped them survey in the line. I was on the line every day. I had a spray bottle on my quad. I ran around, put out little spot fires, did all kinds of stuff. So to me, this is a precious area here. This is just absolutely precious. And these horses are part of this ecosystem. And they've been here, again, we know for sure since 1580. The other thing we know is there's horse fossils right here in the landscape. So that takes us even further back. But we have visual sighting by a British military officer, Drake, in 1580, means they survived the Ice Age here. So these are very special heritage herd of horses, worth protecting, worth guarding, which is really why I'm so upset that Dave Kaufman and KRRC did not put up those fences. I prefer that they had stayed on plan and not sent the sediment down, dewatered over 3 months. You got to think about it logically, Kurtis. I live on the river here. It's now a river in front of my ranch. I would love nothing more than to have salmon and steelhead swimming past my ranch. There's nothing more that I would love to have happen. Nothing. Because these little tiny bony fish that were this big, a lot of people liked them. I didn't. They way too many
Mm.
bones. I don't know if you've ever eaten a crappie or a bluegill, but it's like
Yeah.
mostly bones. Okay. Not my idea of
Right.
a triple fish. I would, I would, I'd probably give my left big toe to have salmon and steelhead swimming past my branch right here. I would love it. But when they started doing things that I know as somebody who grew up here fishing, with an indigenous, my best friend was an indigenous, I know what you got to have those kind of fish in the river and the creeks and streams. And what I saw happening here just shocked me to the core. And now, given the critical interdependence of the ecosystem on this heritage herd of horses, because they still manage our fire fuel here. I mean, there's a lot of arguments that with the loss of the lakes, we're going to have a serious deficit when it comes to fighting fire up here. And we have a lot of fires right around this area, right here, just like that big Klamath fire that destroyed Hornbrook, killed people. Smoke from that fire killed my wife. So the toxins, it wasn't carbon monoxide, it was toxins in that smoke. And you probably know this, Kurtis, you're in the news cycle, but UCLA just issued a brand new report, came out 2 weeks ago, talking about 5,000 Californians a year died from wildfire smoke over the last 10 years.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I mean, 55,000 Californians are dead prematurely from toxins in the smoke, not from carbon monoxide poisoning. You could get that from smoke too. But, and these are people at distance, 300 miles from the fires. So I'm aware, that's an unfortunate lesson that I had to learn as well. I learned that lesson in 2019 when the best doctors in America and actually around the world couldn't change what was happening to my wife. They said there's something happening here and it's related to toxins, and we don't know how to stop this degradation. So, and we see, here's UCLA, boom, here's their big report, 5,000 Californians a year dying from smoke. Bingo, there it is right there, Riazzi. Um,
Yeah.
and so I'm not expecting a lot here. I put my last retirement money into living here because I love wilderness. I love wildlife. I love it. I grew up with it. It's in my blood. I protect the deer here. I protect all the animals here. We put out different kinds of plants so that the pollinators can flourish. We feed the horses. Horses are very interesting because they're the only ungulate. So all these different critters, deer, elk, moose, horses are all ungulates, but some ungulates are ruminants, and that means they chew a cud. So you have deer, elk, moose, caribou, cows, sheep. Those are ruminants. That means they chew a cud. They have a multi-chamber stomach. So when they're in the wilderness, if they eat native flora, they digest all the seeds, and that ends over time that robs the seed bank of replenishment of seeds from flowering plants, and eventually your landscape becomes sparse and you lose your vegetative cover from ruminants. Horses are very unusual because they're single-stomached animals, and there's been studies that it's called the germinability of horse dung. Horses are the only mammal in North America that reseed in their dung. They pass about 90% of the seeds they eat, come out in their poop, and it grows, which is, see, and here's the funny thing, Kurtis, kind of an something that I have trouble dealing with. I grew up here, so I actually logged on the monument. We did selective logging. We took out dead trees. We took out trees that didn't look good. We took out trees where there's too many trees, too much crowding. Forests are like are just like a garden. If you have too many plants in one spot, nobody does good. So early on, like if you're growing corn, you put a lot of seed in, and then the corn comes up. But if it's too bunched up, you pull out some of the single pieces. You thin it out so that everybody does better. And a forest is just like that. If it's too crowded, you end up like some places up here now have 400 or 500 trees per acre, and they're all like, 8 inches around and 150 feet tall, and they're all sick, and the bugs are attacking them because they're all stressed and sick. Well, when we logged, and I was taught by old timers, and half of them were indigenous, they always told us you leave the champion seed trees, you don't touch the champions, you leave the grandfathers. You look at your forest and you think about it before you do anything. And then you take the trees that are sick or dead or dying and you remove those unless they're a grain tree. And a grain tree is a dead tree where the woodpeckers put a lot of holes in them, and they actually store acorns and things in the holes. And that feeds all kinds of other animals. So we never touch the grain trees. And so there's a lot of lessons that I learned from my indigenous people around me, because they still had some knowledge that came from way back. And I took careful note of that because I never wanted to forget those lessons. And so when we went into the forest, we looked at it like we were wildlife. And what do we want? We don't want to cut all these trees down. No, that's the wrong thing to do, because then you get erosion. And then, it's not good for the forest to have erosion, because then the dirt, if you like go in and clear cut, all that, as soon as it rains, it snows, all that topsoil goes off and it goes right into the trout and salmon streams, and it plugs up all the gravel where the fish lay their eggs. And then there's no return, there's no continuation of that life cycle of those salmon and steelhead. They swim up, they lay their eggs, all the gravels are filled with dirt. So the eggs just bounce along the surface and go on down and everything eats them. And there's no returning run from that particular cohort of salmon or steelhead. And, we used to tell other loggers, look, there's a better way to do this. You go in and you carefully assess your forest, and then you decide what you're going to do. And you have to have a strategy that's good for the duration, the evolutionary succession of that forest. You have to think in terms of 500 years, not next week, not my paycheck this weekend. You have to think about, what's this forest going to look like in 500 years if I do something to it today? What is going to happen? And you have to think out, as good forestry. There's not that many. I gotta say, I'm ashamed of some of the loggers I worked with, because the way they did business, it was just heartbreaking, because they would take the grandfather trees, the trees that had all the good seeds and the genetics, because it was a big tree. Instead of thinking about that, hey, we need those genetics that are in that tree. We can't take that tree down. And when the problem that I used to have, because unfortunately, being, college educated, I understood the science and the genetics and evolutionary, successional, evolutionary process. I would talk to people that just been loggers their whole lives, and sometimes they didn't understand. And I said, look, you just can't take that tree. And they go, why not? It's a merchantable tree. And I said, well, because that tree is worth more than the money you will get today. That tree is worth a fortune because it contains genetics that are thousands of years old, and we need that tree there. And they would argue with me. And so
That's a good point.
it's really sad to see how people, if they disagree with you on one thing, they want to condemn you. It's, it's kind of like I tell people, the mailman brings you a letter from the IRS, and if you don't like what the letter says, you shoot the mailman. You know,
Yeah.
I'm a researcher at heart, and I find science and then I write about it or I talk about it, and I show people the science. I cite it, but they don't want to read it. These studies, like there's 3 studies on the dams. There's the Gethard engineering study from 2006. There's 2 CDM Smith studies from 2011. the first one was quite interesting. Warren Buffett and Pacific Corp decided that they wanted to remove the dams in a correct manner. So the CDM Smith came up, and I have this study, and they said, okay, we need to go in there and dredge all that bad sediment out, because Gethard said it's 80% clay, 78 plus percent clay, really bad stuff. Clay, I don't know if you know anything about sediment, but I'll just,
Yeah. Hey, William, I only have a few more minutes here.
yeah.
So if I could ask you a few more questions. I appreciate all the insights, and I'm very sorry to hear about your wife. That's sad. I feel for you on that.
Well, I know
Um,
what those
but I
other,
want to just ask you a few.
yeah, I know what those other
Yeah,
55,000 people feel. Put it that way.
I know, and who knows who is like suffering now and on
Right,
their deathbeds, unfortunately, because of the recent fires.
right.
Um, But I'm not going to, you raise a lot of good points about the sediment, and I'm not going to get into that in this story. I have a very small space that I'm writing for, so it's not going to be the end all story on the success or lack of success with dam removal. But in terms of the horses, you did a great job, thank you, of explaining where they came from and their importance. One other point I wanted to ask you, the Wild Horse Brigade, you kind of mentioned that the horses have helped out with fuels reduction on the monument. Are they doing that in the area around the Klamath River? I'm assuming that's one of the benefits you see in the horses is helping, reduce fuels and control the fire risk in the area where they range.
Right. So, in the fire section of the EIS that KRRC put out there, they talk about the loss of the lake. The lake was a fire break, right? And they say, well, we still have the river.
Mm,
Well, um, the lake was about a mile wide. Okay. Is it really a fire break? Yeah, to some extent it is. But what I've learned being around fires all this time and studying fire as a function of what we do, because we're talking about landscape, we're talking about scalable landscape fuel reduction in California using an herbivory. And I'm not just a one horse wonder. In other words, I believe we need to bring back the 2 million deer that are missing. We need to bring that back and then have them grazing those 3 million tons of grass and brush in California. See, that's why, the combination of a warmer climate and then excessive fuel, I mean, that's the kiss of death. That's why we have these fires. If
mhm,
you get rid of the fuel, it can get really hot. You don't see Sahara Desert on fire. There's no fuel. So the thing
mhm.
is, if we manage fuel, then what happens? You get normal fire again. Burns low and slow because you
Right.
don't have, I fought fire when grass is, 3, 4 inches tall. It doesn't have a 16-foot flame on it. When the grass we have today, 2, 3 feet tall, it burns catastrophically hot. You can't even do prescribed burning anymore because it burns so hot it pasteurizes the soil, it kills everything in sight. Prescribed burning is no longer useful because the grass is too big. So too much. So with regard to the footprint of the lake, okay, so they're trying to stabilize sediment with grass and brush that they planted. And now, will that burn? Probably. When it gets dry, it will burn like any other vegetative material. Does it really change the fire regime to have the horses grazing right in the sediment? Not really. And I just assume they not be in there. And I'll tell you why. And I touched on this. Okay, they planted plants in toxic sediment, and that's a fact. Those sediments are loaded with toxins. And again, they're
Yeah.
bioaccumulative. There's lead, arsenic, chromium, there's PCB, there's furane, there's you name it, there's DDT. They used to treat Copco Lake with DDT and Agent Orange in the 60s to try to kill the beneficial algae that was actually reducing the nitrogen and phosphorus in the water. That's what, and the DEQ and EPA use the same algae back east to remediate polluted water. And here they are because people are so ignorant, they didn't know. They were trying to kill it and using, DDT and all this stuff from Vietnam. They had all these different herbicides they didn't use. And that all went to the bottom. They're forever chemicals. And so the thing is they planted that now. It's there. Well, guess what? When the plants grow, they bring those toxins up into their tissues. And what's eating the plants?
Yeah.
It's just the horses. I don't want my horses down there
No, I
eating.
get that.
The mice are
Yeah,
eating.
no, I get that.
When a mouse eats it, it accumulates in his body. An eagle eats a mouse, he dies. Okay.
Mhm.
Because the mouse builds it up slowly. The eagle eats a mouse, he suddenly gets a super dose, he's dead. And so forth. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I just assume not have the horses down there eating any of that, quite frankly. Um, the horses are protecting this landscape. They've been doing it for a very long time, thousands of years. That's why these forests are still here. We have trees here that are a couple thousand years old. The horses have managed, there used to be, by the way, hundreds and hundreds of horses up in here. Now our herd is all that's left pretty much because they've been pilfered and stolen and taken to auction and sold off. And, I mean, it's like people coming up and taking deer and elk and hauling them away. That's why, the loss of the herbivory it's a human phenomenon. So we're trying to reverse that and get, a more holistic approach to wildlife management. I don't know what we're going to do about this sediment because the real important point that I was going to make is they say they're going to stabilize the sediment in place by planting it. But I don't know if you've been up here, Kurtis, and by the way, you're welcome to come up. I'd love to meet you, take you on a tour, see,
Yeah,
seeing
I'd
with
love
your
for
own,
that.
yeah, seeing with your own eyes, Kurtis,
Yep.
changes your, I mean, it's illuminating. Okay. So,
I've been up there several times, just so you know, and
okay.
I've seen the horses before up in the.
Okay.
Well, I wanted to ask you, how far do the horses that you own, how far do they range? Because I've been to, and forgive me, it's been a while since I've been to this, been hiking up in the monument, but I was on the California side of the monument, Jenny Creek, DeSoto, I'm sorry, but I saw horses when I was up there on the California side. I don't know if those are different horses or those are part of your herd. Just kind of wondering how far your horses go.
Generally, they're pretty close to my ranch. They're within a few miles in any given direction. They usually don't cross Jenny Creek. We don't know what's going to happen now that the lakes are gone. In the past, they never went past Jenny Creek to the east.
Okay.
They always stayed to the west of Jenny Creek in that big canyon. That was kind of like a natural barrier. We don't know what they're going to do. California State, one of the projects the students are doing is that they're photographically um, that we're basically doing a census on our entire herd. We started last year. So each horse is photographed to put in a digital database, markings, family tree, we're doing the whole ethology of the.
Cool.
So we're actually documenting the entire herd so that we have an exact certainty. And we've been doing this for a very long time, for 10 years, but now we're doing it in a database at Cal State. But there is, answer your question, to the east of us, 20 miles, is a herd management area called the Pokegama Herd Management Area. And it's a BLM herd management area under the 1971 Free Roaming Wild Horse Protection Act. And shockingly, they say the appropriate number of horses there is 30 to 50 horses on 87,000 acres. Now, here's another example of agency overstep and ignorance. The International Union of Nature Conservancy, which is like the National Academy of Science for Wildlife, IUCN said the minimum herd size to maintain genetic diversity is 2,500 horses in a herd, not 30.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah. Big
what
difference.
BLM has done is guaranteed inbreeding and the extinction of that small herd of horses that's up there. We sued them and beat them in federal court in Washington, D.C. They were going to round up the remaining horses. Our organization, we're represented by Vermont Law University. We sued them and beat them, and couldn't do their roundup. So, and that's the only herbivores, by the way, managing the wildfire fuel up there. They don't have hardly any deer or elk. I mean, when I grew up here, there was thousands of deer here and elk everywhere. And now you're lucky if you see any deer. So we have to change this, Kurtis. And the thing is I need media to help get the truth out rather than fund, basically use media to fund, a type of propaganda that benefits people making money. This problem with the dam removal, if they would have did it according to CDM Smith and dredged the sediment, they wouldn't do it because it's $400 million. They said, no, we're not going to do that. Just figure out a cheap way to do it. And so CDM Smith figured out the cheap way. They said, well, we could let it go down because it only has this much lead and this much dioxin, and I mean these levels are above and below EPA levels. And so shockingly, and then their study, and I have both studies, like it's a pretty cool turnaround. And when you see it, their second study is full of legal disclaimer language. Their attorneys got a hold of it, and they said, we believe, we assume. There's nothing that says study show. There's nothing in it anywhere. It says study show. It's we believe, we assume, we hope. They use those kind of words. And at the very end, the shocker, at the very end of this 300-page study that said, okay, we're going to let the sediment go down the river, which is what they needed. It says that we also believe that dilution is the solution to pollution, and that as the sediment goes down, the toxins, if there's enough water in the year that we do it, it will hopefully dilute the toxins to a level where it won't impact the wildlife. So there's just like a whole string of like disclaimer language and assumptions, and nothing. There is zero science supporting it. And of course, we saw what happened. Everything got dead, and it didn't go the way they planned. Nothing is going according to plan. That's an accurate statement. The fire hydrants that they put in, the dry hydrants, the intakes are out of the water. I mean, these are rigid. They're not like flexible or anything. They're out of the water. So if a fire truck shows up to get water during a fire on the river here, right there at Klamath, right at the Iron Gate Dam, I took a picture of it, did a story about it. The intake is out of the water. If you come up and with a tender and you need water because you got 7 engines up on a fire line, the engines hold 750 gallons. The tender holds 5,000. So he fills up at the river and he runs up there and fills those boys up that are fighting the fire. They don't come back down off the mountain. So when a tender goes to Iron Gate Dam, and I got pictures of it, I'll send them to you, the intake is out of the water. So they don't even know that. I called Cal Fire. Did you know that the dry hydrant at Iron Gate Dam, the intake's out of the water? They go, it is? Well, we were up there some weeks ago.
That's crazy.
They don't even know. That's how, I mean, this is scary, Kurtis, because people will die. People will die.
That is scary.
Good people that live here, they'll die. I don't want to see anybody else die. I'm so done.
Well, William, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me. I took a lot of notes. Like I said before, the story won't be on the sediment issue. It's going to be a short story on the horses. And what I'll assure you is I'm going to present your side and the other side fairly. As you said earlier, I'm sort of the mailman. I sort of report what people say, and
they have
I'm
no
the messenger. I'm not taking a
legal
side or
standing.
anything.
They have no legal standing in their argument.
Yeah,
None.
and that's what Siskiyou County told me. So
And we're suing
that's
them.
what I'm going to report.
We're actually suing them right now. I just sent them a demand letter, Kurtis, stating what, and I'll have to send it to you, that we're going to be in court probably. We're suing them for $12,000 for the loss of that baby horse because they didn't put that fence up like they said. And here's the other thing. This will shock you, Kurtis. Okay, you can look up what a legal fence is in this county. Okay, it says it has to have so many posts, and it's got to be a certain kind of wire, and it's all that kind of stuff. And it says it has to turn away livestock. Okay, they're currently putting up an electric fence with 2 strands of wire. That is not a legal fence. And so when the horses go through that, they don't have any argument again. Once again, see, and they don't. And I mean, I have texts from county officials here saying that these people came into the county and they didn't get one permit, not one. They're doing hundreds of things that need permits, hundreds. They didn't get one permit. They gave the county the middle finger and said, we'll do what we want. And it's kind of like, what? I mean, where did you got Nazis come from? What do you mean you'll do what you want? We have county regulations, we have state regulations for reasons. There's reasons. And the fence law talks about what kind of fence you need for a reason. If they put up this electric fence they're building right now, and the insulators are on it, I know, I got pictures. I know it's an electric fence, and I know it's going to have 2 strands. Electric fences are notorious for starting fires. I mean, talk about want to start a fire, put electric fence through a brushy landscape. They got miles and miles of this stuff they're going to put up in a brushy landscape. I mean,
yeah, that's insane.
I don't get it, Kurtis. Do they really want to save this area and the wildlife and the monument, or do they want everything to burn down to the ground and nothing left? No fish in the river, no trees, no wildlife, no nothing. Is that what they want? Because what they're doing right
I
now,
hope it's not the latter. Yeah.
I mean, that is the path that they are walking on right now. Instead of asking us, because we live here, we grew up here, we love this place. We don't want anything bad to ever happen here. And we want to see it flourish naturally. We want to see a beautiful green forest. We want to see salmon and steelhead in the rivers jumping right into our nets. Absolutely. But the way these guys are going about it, I just either wonder who taught them what they know, because they sure don't know very much about out here how to manage a wilderness area. And then two, a smart guy always gets the smarter people around him. I mean, we talk about getting knowledge from the Native Americans. Why? Indigenous knowledge is knowledge that some of it we don't have. These folks that showed up, KRRC and RES, they don't ask any local people about how to do anything. And we've been here 4 generations.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, why was the monument pristine when they got here? I mean, I asked that people that question. You love the monument, you want to protect it. Why do you think it was pristine when you got here? It's because we were taking care of it because before you showed up, along with the 400 horses that lived right in the monument, not my herd, but a different. There was all the way up to Crater Lake. There was hundreds of horses. I actually have the journal. I'd share it with you. I have the personal diary from one of the most famous cowboys in the area, half indigenous. His name is George F. Wright. The DOI, Department of Interior, he was their go-to guy for all the information on the monument, where all the archaeological relics were, how everything worked, this, that, the other thing. Uh, he cited extensively in a DOI document. I have 300-page DOI document. George Wright, George Wright, George Wright. I have his personal diary. And I have his personal photo album because black and white goes all the way back to 1911, shows the grizzly bears up here, the wolves, all the animals. And he talks about how and he was half white, he was half indigenous, talks about how the cowboys would just shoot stuff and laugh about it. And he thought that was horrific. I do too. I think that's horrific. But he talks about what happened, but he's got pictures, 1911, of the wild horses up in this area. And he says he actually makes very, very careful notes, the domestic versus, he calls them the wild ones on the range. That's 1911. The monument was formed in the year 2000 by Clinton. So we're talking, 90 years before they even thought about a monument. The horses were up there and it was pristine, and everybody got here and it's oh so pristine. And they look at it and they love it and they want to protect it. And so what do? Oh, we got to get rid of these horses. Well, hold it. What were the horses doing? Nobody asked the right questions. What were the horses doing here for the last 2,000 years? Oh, they were managing the fuel, replanting the native flora, and keeping this forest beautiful. That's what they were doing.
Well, that's a good note to end on. Again, thank you for taking the time to talk and being forthright with your insights. And I will look you up next time I'm up there, if that's okay,
I'd
and give
love
you a
to have
call.
you. I'd love to show you
Yeah,
around.
no, I'd love to meet you in person. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's always better in person. Unfortunately, I cover all of California, so I can't be everywhere in California
Right.
on on short notice. But I've definitely been up to Siskiyou County a bunch, and it is beautiful, as you put it.
Yeah, it's a pretty special place, Kurtis, but
Yep.
I've worked with different producers up here on different documentaries, and I can show you some things that I think it would really help people understand that we have to be very careful about how we manage our wilderness, and we just can't take it for granted that a big corporation knows what they're doing. I think when we do that, we take a huge gamble, and I think at the end of all of this, we're going to find that what happened here on the Klamath River, and the reason I'm writing the things I write is because my dad said, learn from your hard knocks, and better yet, learn from the hard knocks of other people, because that's easy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what I don't want to have happen. I mean, I'm not saying dams shouldn't come out either, Kurtis. Don't get me wrong. There are some dams that should come away, for sure.
Mhm.
There's some dams that should stay for the right reasons, but you have to analyze it carefully. But on this situation here, I think this is going to turn out to be a series of unintended consequences because of hasty, cost-cutting, careless operation, and which is pretty much about the money. And so I think that if we focus on what went wrong and why it went wrong, we can improve the process. See, that's my goal. My goal is not to just rain on Mark Bransom or rain on my goal. And unfortunately, by pointing out what went wrong, they get upset. They don't like me. Oh, Bill, why don't you just be quiet? You know, it's going to happen. Just shut up. You know, but the problem is if we did that, then the same mistakes would be repeated somewhere else. And we don't want to have that happen. That's why wildfires are burning California. California is burning, but not many people are learning yet. They don't ask, why are we on fire? It's not climate. Climate accelerates the drying of the fuels. It is the prodigious fuel load that we have because we collapsed our herbivory. And there's 120 published scientific studies that say that. Not just me. I live it. I see it. I know it. And I stopped a fire with an herbivory, so I know it works. So, what the point here is we could do better, Kurtis. I mean, if we learn from, instead of covering up the mistakes so nobody learns, if we learn from okay, here's the mistakes. Yeah, ouch. It wasn't a good deal. I'm sorry, you know, this is not an A on your report card on this experiment. There was a lot of things that went wrong, and here's why they went wrong. Here's how we could do it better, right? That's how you move forward. That's what science is about, is learning from the experiment and moving forward. But if you learn from the experiment, then cover it up and smooth over it. Oh, it's all going as planned. Nothing to see, folks. Move on. Then guess what? The disaster gets repeated. So, you know, we can do a better job, Kurtis, and that's my goal. My goal is to say, look, you know, unfortunately, you guys don't like me talking about what went wrong. That's part of this process. And
Absolutely. No, keep
you
up
need
the observations and the critiques. It's very important to the process.
Yeah, I take a lot of heat for it, Kurtis. I know you do too as a reporter, but if we work
Yeah,
together,
I feel your pain, right?
I don't want you to report anything that's not true. Anything I tell you, okay, anything I tell you, I can show you other people in writing, scientists, you know, the real people. You could go to court with it, and the judge would say, yeah, that's the right thing right there. That's how I do business. And the thing
I
is,
appreciate that.
you know, and that's how we have to write things. I mean, yeah, we use a little hyperbole. Everybody does. You gotta, how do you sell newspapers? With hyperbole. So yeah, sometimes you mix in a little bit of hyperbole, but to get people to look at the truth. I mean, if you go, well, more of the same, they're not going to read the article. But if you say, you know, like my journalism professor at school said, you know, if you write dog bites man, nobody reads the story. If you write man bites dog, everybody reads it. Right? So
Yeah.
it's you know, and then Jonathan Foster, I don't know if you know him, he's a professor of journalism. Um, you know, tough old journalist, old school journalist. He tells his students, and I'm going to quote him now. So this is his quote. He says, as journalists, if somebody writes, it's raining outside, and somebody writes, it's not raining outside, he says, it's your job to look out the fucking window and determine what's true. That's his quote, not
Yeah,
mine.
good point. Yeah,
And
that's a good point.
you know, I love hardcore journalism because it teaches an important lesson. It doesn't, I don't want to give people who are looking for truth two questions and try to go figure it out yourself. You know, just leave them with more questions. You know, it's better if we can to say, okay, here are the questions, and this seems to be the truth. Like here's this science by CDM Smith that says, hey, the toxins are in the sediment. Everybody says, oh, there's no toxins in the sediment. Well, you're calling CDM Smith a liar, not me. I just published a report and quoted it.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, so go argue with CDM Smith, not me.
yeah. Well, thank you again, William. I will let you go,
All
and
right.
we will talk in the future for sure. I'm glad we started this conversation.
Well, I appreciate it, Kurtis, and thank you for what you do. I know it's a hard job.
Thank you for what you do too. It's hard as well. We'll see you.
All right, cheers.
Cheers.